Hello and welcome back. Before dawn, an Axis airfield lies silent beneath the desert sky. There is no battle here, no British artillery, no tanks approaching through clouds of dust. The front is many kilometres away. Aircraft stand in orderly rows. Fuel drums wait beside maintenance tents. Mechanics sleep, expecting another ordinary morning of war. The engines are cold. The guards stare into a darkness that appears completely empty. Then, the desert moves. Small figures emerge from the blackness. They carry explosives designed to burn through metal. They cross the open ground, moving from aircraft to aircraft. Charges are placed. Fuses are lit. The raiders disappear into the night. 2 seconds, then the airfield erupts. Flames climb into the sky. Ammunition begins to explode. Fuel burns across the sand. Men run between aircraft that will never fly again. By morning, the British attackers are gone, but something more dangerous than wreckage has been left behind. A question. If they could reach this airfield, where else could they reach? This is the story of Lieutenant Colonel David Stirling, the men who helped him create the Special Air Service and the hidden war that turned the rear of Rommel's desert army into a place of uncertainty. Before continuing, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more stories of British soldiers, commanders, and forgotten wartime operations reach the audience they deserve. The first thing the Axis forces began to lose was sleep. The front line was only one part of the Desert War. General Erwin Rommel was a skillful and dangerous commander. His forces had repeatedly surprised the British, combining armour, artillery and aircraft with speed and aggression. Rommel understood how to read a battlefield, how to exploit hesitation, and how to make a smaller force appear stronger through movement. British commanders respected him because he had earned that respect. But the desert created a problem that even the finest battlefield commander could not escape. An army might fight at the front, but it lived behind it. It needed fuel transported across vast distances. It needed ammunition, workshops, replacement vehicles, communications, airfields, and roads. Every advance stretched those systems further. During Operation Crusader in November 1941, Rommel's forces outran their fuel supplies, helping to bring their attack to a halt. Later, fuel and supply shortages again restricted Axis operations. The North African campaign was, above all, a struggle over logistics. A tank army does not live on courage alone. It lives on fuel, roads, aircraft, and time. Stirling understood that the British did not always have to meet Rommel's armour directly. A small group could attack the machinery that allowed that armour to move. The next entry in the nightmare ledger was aircraft. In the desert, air power could expose troop movements, strike supply columns, and punish forces caught in open country. An aircraft destroyed in the air required a pilot, another aircraft, and a successful engagement. An aircraft destroyed on the ground required something different: stealth, a handful of explosives, and the nerve to walk into an enemy airfield at night. Every aircraft destroyed before takeoff was one less threat over British soldiers the following day. Every damaged fuel store complicated the work of mechanics. Every raid forced the Axis to consider diverting men, weapons, and transport to protect places previously regarded as safe. The raiders did not need to capture an airfield. They only needed to leave it burning. But before the Special Air Service became a legend, it was an idea that many officers could reasonably have dismissed. In July 1941, Captain David Stirling created a small unit in Egypt called L Detachment, Special Air Service Brigade. The grand title was partly a deception. The original force contained only 67 officers and men, but the name was intended to suggest that Britain possessed a larger airborne formation in the region. Stirling was tall, confident, and deeply uncomfortable with conventional military routine. He had served with the Scots Guards and joined the commandos, but became frustrated by cancelled operations and the difficulty of using large raiding forces effectively. He began to imagine something smaller. Instead of landing hundreds of men from the sea, why not drop a few carefully selected soldiers behind the enemy? They could attack several targets, cause damage, and disappear before the enemy understood what had happened. It was an attractive idea. The reality was almost fatal. The unit was not Stirling's achievement alone. Lieutenant Jock Lewes helped shape its training, discipline, and methods. He taught desert survival, navigation, demolitions, first aid, and observation. He also developed the Lewes bomb, combining explosive and incendiary effects in a weapon suited to destroying aircraft and vehicles. Paddy Mayne, an Irish rugby international and formidable commando officer, would become one of the unit's most effective fighting leaders. And the long-range desert group already possessed the knowledge that made deep desert movement possible. Its men understood navigation, concealment, vehicle maintenance, and survival across enormous distances. Stirling supplied the central vision and fought to keep the unit alive. Others helped turn that vision into a weapon. The first operation came in November 1941. It was called Operation Squatter. 55 men were sent by parachute into Libya during terrible weather. Their objective was to attack Axis airfields in support of the wider British offensive. The wind scattered them, equipment was lost, men were dragged across the ground or injured on landing. Some disappeared into the storm. Only 21 returned. The first operation of the Special Air Service had ended in disaster. There was no heroic way to disguise it. The concept had failed. Men had been killed or captured. The unit could easily have been dissolved before it had proved anything. War is filled with promising ideas that do not survive their first meeting with reality. Stirling's achievement was not that he avoided failure. It was that he learned from it quickly enough to prevent failure from becoming final. Parachuting into the desert had introduced too much uncertainty. Wind could scatter men and supplies across miles of empty ground. A raiding party, weakened before reaching its target, had little chance of returning. The answer was already driving through the desert. The Long-Range Desert Group. Its patrols could carry the Special Air Service across country that the enemy considered impassable, deliver the raiders near their targets, and return later to collect them. The aircraft had failed them. The vehicles would not. We've reached halfway, so please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments whether you believe small raiding forces can influence a campaign as much as conventional armies. 1 month after the disaster, Stirling's surviving men went out again. This time, there would be no parachute drop. Long-range Desert Group vehicles carried separate parties deep behind the Axis positions. The raiders traveled by night, hid during daylight, and approached their targets on foot. The desert itself became their camouflage. On the night of the 14th of December, 1941, Paddy Mayne led a small party against Tamet airfield in Libya. They entered the airfield and attacked aircraft at close range. Lewis bombs were attached to some machines, while others were damaged by gunfire. Fuel tanks, ammunition, and communications were also struck. According to the National Army Museum, 24 aircraft were destroyed during the attack. It was the success the new unit desperately needed. The rhythm of the new war had been established. Silence, movement, a sudden eruption of violence, then distance. By the time Axis forces reacted, the attackers were already heading back into country where ordinary military formations could not easily follow. But this was not effortless adventure. The desert could kill without firing a shot. Navigation errors could lead a patrol hundreds of kilometers away from water or fuel. Engines overheated. Tires were destroyed by rock. Sand entered weapons, food, and machinery. During the day, the heat could become overwhelming. At night, temperatures collapsed. A broken vehicle was not merely an inconvenience, it could become a death sentence. The raiders also operated beyond immediate medical support. A wounded man might have to endure hours or days of travel over rough ground. If the enemy discovered a hidden camp, there was rarely a secure position to defend. These men were not invincible. They were isolated. That was the source of their freedom and the source of their danger. The next thing the Axis began to lose was distance. Before the raids, distance had protected airfields, headquarters, and storage areas. British forces could not threaten everything behind the front because conventional units required roads, supplies, and support. Stirling's men treated distance differently. They did not attempt to occupy the desert. They crossed it. They carried fuel, water, weapons, and explosives in vehicles adapted for long journeys. They learned to travel without obvious landmarks. They used timing, concealment, and intelligence to approach from directions the enemy was unlikely to watch. The desert was not empty. It was a road without signs. And the British had found men who knew how to read it. From the summer of 1942, heavily armed jeeps allowed special air service patrols to strike airfields with machine gun fire as well as explosives. The attacks became faster. Engines approached through darkness. Gunners opened fire across parked aircraft. Tracer rounds cut through the night. Before the defenders could organize, the jeeps accelerated away. Fire! Turn! Move! No attempt to hold the ground. No time wasted celebrating the damage. The objective was survival. The National Army Museum credits Special Air Service desert operations with destroying more than 300 Axis aircraft, although wartime destruction claims should never be treated as perfectly exact. What matters is that the raids produced real, repeated damage with remarkably small forces. Yet aircraft and fuel were only part of the effect. The next thing lost was confidence. The nightmare was not that British raiders were everywhere. It was that Axis forces could no longer be certain where they were not. An airfield guard who had once watched the road now had to watch the desert. A supply officer could no longer assume that distance provided protection. Aircraft had to be dispersed. Guards had to be strengthened. Patrols had to be organized. Defensive positions consumed wire, weapons, transport and men who might otherwise have supported operations at the front. This did not paralyze Rommel's army. It did not defeat the Afrika Korps by itself. But irregular warfare rarely works by replacing the main army. It works by forcing a larger enemy to spend more resources solving more problems. The Special Air Service was one pressure among many. The Royal Navy and Royal Air Force attacked Axis supply routes across the Mediterranean. Malta remained a vital base for operations against shipping. The British 8th Army fought the decisive land battles. Commonwealth soldiers from Australia, New Zealand, India, South Africa, and elsewhere carried an immense share of the fighting. Stirling's raiders did not win the Desert War alone. Their contribution was to make the wider British effort more complicated for the enemy and less predictable. They created pressure behind the pressure. The cost remained severe. Jock Lewes, whose discipline and inventions had been fundamental to the unit, was killed on the 30th of December 1941 when enemy aircraft attacked his vehicle as he returned from a mission. He had survived the disastrous first operation. He did not survive the unit's first month of success. Other men were killed, wounded, or captured. Some disappeared in the desert. Success could not protect them from exhaustion, mechanical failure, enemy patrols, or simple misfortune. The mythology of special forces often removes the waiting, the thirst, and the fear. The reality was less glamorous. Men sat in vehicles for hours, listening to engines and watching fuel gauges. They searched darkness for landmarks that might not exist. They approached airfields, knowing that one guard, one flare,
or one weapon failing to fire could expose the entire party. Courage in such conditions was not loud. It was controlled movement when every instinct demanded speed. It was patience when the target was visible. It was walking towards parked aircraft while knowing that hundreds of enemy soldiers might be sleeping nearby. By September 1942, the Special Air Service had grown sufficiently to receive regimental status. Stirling had proved that a small independent force could produce results out of proportion to its size. But he would not remain with it for much longer. In January 1943, he was captured during an operation in Tunisia. By then, his German opponents had reportedly given him the name the Phantom Major. His capture caused fears that the unit might collapse. It did not. Paddy Mayne continued to lead it. Stirling's brother William helped establish a second regiment.
The Special Air Service went on to fight in Sicily, Italy, and occupied Europe. That survival was perhaps the greatest proof that Stirling had created more than a personal following. He had helped create a method. The method was simple to describe and extremely difficult to practice. Find the vulnerable point. Move where the enemy does not expect movement. Attack quickly. Leave before strength can be brought against you. It was not a replacement for infantry, armor, naval power, or air power. It was another instrument. And in the Western Desert, Britain needed every instrument it could find. Rommel remained a dangerous commander. His soldiers remained disciplined and experienced. Axis forces continued to win battles after the first Special Air Service raids. There is no reliable evidence that Rommel personally spent his nights obsessed with David Stirling. The title of this story describes a strategic reality, not a private fear that can be documented. Stirling did not defeat Rommel alone. He helped make Rommel's war more difficult. That distinction matters. The Special Air Service threatened the vulnerable network behind the famous armored columns. It struck aircraft before they reached the sky. It forced attention away from the front. It showed that the vast desert rear could no longer be treated as secure. How do you fight a commander who has mastered movement? Sometimes by attacking the fuel that makes movement possible. How do you weaken air power without winning a battle in the sky? Sometimes by reaching the aircraft before the pilots do. And how can a few men trouble an army of thousands? By forcing that army to fear an attack in every place those few men might appear. The fires at the airfield are dying now. The damaged aircraft remain where they stood. Smoke drifts across the sand. Mechanics begin counting what can be repaired and what has been lost. The front line is still far away. Rommel's army still exists. The Desert War is not over. But something has changed. The rear is no longer silent. Distance is no longer protection. Darkness no longer belongs entirely to the defenders. Rommel built his Desert War on speed, movement, and timing. The British officer who understood that did not need to destroy everything in front of him. He only had to prove that behind the front, in the places where an army believes it can breathe, the desert could still produce a nightmare. If you watched until the end, write the word Kabrit in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone who believes the most important battles are not always fought on the front line.